Years. All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our second session of our Planning for the Future limited special edition, we call it that, class here with Dionne Lovestad-Jones from the LCMS Foundation and Natalie Barber, who's a member of our congregation, also an attorney who regularly works with the kind of things that we've been discussing. We're going to continue on here. I'm going to hand the mic over to them momentarily. But thank you for being here for this. And as we look ahead to the future, doing practical things like making estate plans and wills and trusts and all those things, that's all good stuff. It's all part of how God calls us to be stewards of the gifts that He gives. So please join me for a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you brought us back together again this morning. We pray your blessing upon Dionne and Natalie as they help us to better understand how to be managers, stewards of your gifts in this world. Guide us as your people that we might be stewards joyfully, using what you've entrusted to our care for service and care for the people around us for generations to come. We ask all this, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so who's kicking off? Dionne? All right, there you go.
I get bookends again. Good morning. Hey, we got some of the thoughts today. I'm going to dive right in. Natalie gets all the good, meaty plot in the middle. You just give me for the forward and the conclusion. So with that, we'll just start in. How's that? Okay, we're going to talk real quick, a little definition. She's got a cool top 10 for you today. Trying to figure out what might work. Lots of definitions when it comes to trusts. Lots of crazy, acronyms would we call it? Initials, letters, all that kind of stuff. And what do we do to get started? Just in review real quick, who needs estate plans? Everyone, heard it, thank you. Yeah, just a really good reminder that now's the time, and there's no time like the present. We get to use all of those great things today. But for me, it's still part of this stewardship, right? This stewardship plan. God has entrusted everything that we have into our care. For us to be good stewards also includes estate planning. And it's just taking a whole life look. Also looking at conversations that we have. How do we steward conversations with the people that we love over the assets that we have? And what do we want to hand down to others or to give as gifts to charity and to ministry? What does that look like? How can we extend our stewardship even after we're in heaven? And that's really what this is, what we're talking about today. Gift planning, the stuff that I do for the foundation, is all about finding the best asset, the best method, the best gift. And it's really just part of your whole estate planning process. You still need the other people on the team. We talked real quick. I got to remember what slide's after this. Natalie can do the review here, and I think the team slide's at the end. That's why I moved it. So here we go. Natalie, you're up. I got the new and updated graphic on that.
I like that. So the slide that we have up here is a pour-over will illustration, because if you have a trust as the foundation of your estate plan, you still have a will, but the will becomes what's called a pour-over will. So once you have a trust where that kind of is where it says where everything goes when you pass away. Also some incapacity provisions. So if something happens to you where you're not dead, you're still alive, but you kind of don't have all your faculties about you and you need a little help, that's the incapacity provision. So a trust can do kind of two things, where a will can only say where stuff's going to go when you pass away. All right. But with the trust, you're still going to have the pour-over will. And so that just says, here's my name, here's who I'm related to. If you have minor children, that's where we put guardians in. Okay, so if I pass away and my kids are still minors, here's who I want to be guardians of my children. And then the next paragraph says, now look at my trust for the rules. So we still have a will if we have a trust. It's just called a pour-over will. All right, so what are the advantages of a trust? right? If I have a will and the will's gonna say where stuff goes when I die, well, why would I want a trust instead? And then why would I want to have that pour over will instead of just a regular will? So the biggest advantage with a trust, whether you have modest income or whether you're a millionaire or billionaire, you don't have to be uber wealthy to have a trust. Trusts are for everybody if you own your own home because they help you avoid probate. So what's probate? Just a review from last week, that's where if you die in Illinois, if you die without a will or a trust, so no estate planning, or you die and you have a will, you have to go to probate in both of those instances. So in order to start, for your executor to start doing the stuff that he or she needs to do to get your stuff to the beneficiaries, you have to file the will with the courthouse or the lack thereof, right? If there's no estate plan, then you do something called intestate probate, meaning without a will. So in either situation, you gotta file the will with the courthouse, an actual court case is open, and it's open for 6 months, and you have to pay a lawyer to go see the judge a couple times, and say, yes, judge, we're doing everything we need to do. And then you have to publish in the newspaper, there's a claims period, so it's a very sort of public type thing. Whereas with a trust, you show a death certificate, and boom, your successor trustee can start doing the things. There's no court, there's no oversight, everything can happen privately. Question?
So what's that certificate to who?
To whoever is holding the trust asset, right? So if you've got a bank account, right, let's say I did trust planning, or my family did for our estate plan, and then and it's a joint trust, let's say, my husband and I, he's passed away, so now I'm a widow, and now I pass away, whoever my successor trustee is named in that trust will take, my death certificate and a copy of the trust to the bank, let's say, so PNC is where I bank, and they can just show that trust copy and that death certificate, and that successor trustee is now in charge of that trust account. And then they follow the trust, and if it says equal shares to the Barber kids, and there are 3 of them, and let's say there's $30,000 in that account, I wish, then each kid would get 10 grand, right? But probably because I've got 3 kids and they're 7, 6, and 5, I've probably done some trust planning within that trust. So what that trust would probably say when you take that trust to the bank, right, to get that money out, is it says, no, those kids are, let's say, 17, 16, and 15 when I pass, and my husband and I are gone. So we died young, they wore us out. It probably says within that trust, actually there are children's separate trusts for each of these Barber kids. So you, as a successor trustee, have to, probably with the help of a lawyer, start these mini trust accounts. So these little trusts, these children's trusts that are tucked into your trust, those are called testamentary trusts. So just imagine they're kind of just like laying by the side of the road, and they don't like wake up until you pass away. But then the successor trustee, that's part of the trust administration in this example, where the kids are just too young, they haven't aged out yet, and so these little mini trusts are going to be set up for them. Long answer to your question. All right, so do you need a trust? Well, yes, because that's going to be your best estate planning document. All right, a will get you by. It's better than nothing, but a trust is kind of like the deluxe, and it can just do more than a will. Wills just aren't designed to sort of help you organize your assets during your life, and then wills, unlike trusts, they don't have this incapacity provision. Where I've had a few, actually this year, a couple of elderly couples where, husband and wife, they're married, they've got a trust, and they're both co-trustees of their trust. But let's say, the wife, she's not doing so well. She's got early onset Alzheimer's, or maybe just a little bit of dementia. And she can't meet that standard within the trust that says she's able to give intelligent consideration to her financial affairs. So it's time for her not to be trustee anymore. It's time for just the husband to be in charge. Almost like a mini guardianship without going to court. So a trust can do that. It's a little bit of planning that saves you a lot of court time in the end. So hopefully you never need to call on that incapacity provision. My grandma Carmichael is 93 and she has a trust, And I don't think we're ever gonna have to call on that provision. So, but great, right? She's got the planning in there, because life seems to work like that, right? It's like we plan, then it doesn't end up happening because you're prepared, right? So when you're unprepared, it's like, oh no, I was caught unprepared. We don't want that. All right, so you absolutely are gonna wanna trust if you own, let's say you have your home here in Illinois, but then you've got that Wisconsin cabin where you own property in another state. Every state where you own property, if you've got either a will or no will, right? You're gonna have to probate in every single state. So let's say you live in Illinois, but you've got that Wisconsin cabin and you have a beach house in Florida. So you'd open the primary probate here in Illinois, and then we have to open something called ancillary, or sort of like extra probate in Wisconsin, and then also in Florida. So you can imagine, so the average probate case, let's pretend there are no claims, can cost somewhere between like $2,000 to $5,000 just doing the formal steps. Because you have to have a lawyer do them, and there's a lot of going to court and all that good stuff. So it'd be triple that, right? Because you have to probate in each state. And you'd have to find a lawyer who's licensed to practice law in each of those states too. So 3 lawyers. What's worse than 1 lawyer? 3 lawyers. So trusts are really cool because you can keep it as simple as you want, or you can get as creative as you want. I sort of describe a situation like what we would have for our family, because we've got the 3 minor children. But you may have someone in your family who is vulnerable or has special needs, or even if they're just a full, functioning member of society. Let's say they just get some type of government benefits. You're going to want to do tucked inside of your trust, right? Just like those children's trusts are tucked inside of Justin's and mine. You're going to want what's called a special needs trust. Because if somebody is getting government benefits, right, they're getting disability or they're getting SSI, the minute that they inherit the money outright and you haven't put it through that funnel or that cloak of a special needs trust, the government's going to count that as income, and then they're going to diminish or lose their benefits. So a special needs trust is just, and honestly, it's just some magic language. It just says, and it literally says in there, hey, government, this is for supplemental, right? This is not for the basic needs of this person. And so by saying the language that way for what the money's supposed to be for, and the fact that it's in trust with a trustee that's sort of got pulling the strings, right? And the person doesn't have access to it, the government cannot count that as income. So, a little tip. And we talked again, or just to review again, trusts they're very private. So you asked, who do you show the death certificate to, right? Or what do we do? So you'll probably just, at the person's death, the successor trustee will just need a quick meeting with an attorney, right? Someone like us that knows how to do trust administration. You'll get an EIN or a taxpayer ID number for the trust. During your life, your trust is associated with your social security number, and it's usually revocable or revocable, however fancy you want to sound when you say it. And you can change it during your life, right? So I had a person, she was a school teacher, never married, and former students would come visit her and some wouldn't. So she was on her 12th restated trust by the time she passed, because every year she would sort of keep track, and then she would come see us, and the students that had visited her stayed in the trust, and their amount increased usually, and then some people were written out, and then one year I would notice, oh, they're back in, okay, they must have, brought some cookies on Christmas or something. So you can change your trust, right? But then when you pass away, the successor trustee comes to me or someone like me, gets that EIN number, because now you're passed away, right? So we can't use your social security number. So we get a little taxpayer ID for the trust. It becomes irrevocable, and now it's just time for the successor trustee to just carry on the duties, all right? But they can do it as slow or as fast as they want. There's no probate process. So you avoid probate. You don't have to publish in the newspaper. There's no court case. Nobody sees a copy of the trust. It's a private, sort of dignified process is how I would describe it. All right, so top 10 reasons to have a trust. Question?
Yeah, of course. With revising trusts and just being able to go, like, say, go and say, here's your trust, here's the death certificate.
Yep.
is there a verification process I have to do? Because let's say someone has a whole copy of the trust and they can death certificate, you know, when someone comes down, so they snake it out and that they're not using the updated trust.
Right. So, okay, so he's asking, well, how do you know it's the last best copy of the trust? And how does the bank know that? And how do these things not get confused, right? Like my lady with her 12th restated. How do we know that this is the last best version? There's something that financial institutions will often ask for. They don't have to, so it's not the best process, right? Because it's like, it's not recorded anywhere. It's not like a deed where I can just go look it up and find the last deed of record, like to your home, for example. So it's a little bit of an honor system, but what financial institutions will do before they release the money or allow you to do a transfer, they'll ask for something called a trust certificate. And it's typically signed by the attorney for the trust. And it's something simply where I say, look, I'm an officer of the court. It's like a t-shirt, like, trust me, I'm a lawyer. So it says, trust me, I'm a lawyer, right? I'm an officer of the court, and I'm signing this document that says, you know, I reviewed the trust, and this is the last best copy, and the trust hasn't been amended or restated since it was signed on such date. Or if it's the 12th restated lady, right? Since it was restated on such and such date. So the trust certificate is kind of your answer for that.
Is it generally financial institution best practice that they would want to do that to cover?
Yes, so he asked, is that like best practices? Is that sort of a commonly accepted practice or typically what you would see? I would say yes, about 99% of the time. Yeah. Even a title company, like if the house is in trust and then you're going to sell the house, they're going to want a trust certificate to clear that exception on the title. All right, so we talked about how trusts are private. Yay, no one has to know your business. All right, that's my number one reason. To preserve assets, right? So we talked about the special needs trust example. We talked about the children's trust example. With trusts, they're sort of, think about it like a protective layer. It's sort of like you can like hold it's like those like marionette dolls, right? You can kind of pull the strings from beyond the grave. Kind of a little eerie sounding, but you can maintain control, right? It's kind of like mom and dad are still alive, so to speak, right? In the example with my kids. Really cool thing, can't do it with a joint trust, but with I call it his and hers trust. You title the assets, like the husband will have his own trust, the wife will have her own trust, and then when you fund the trust, sorry, I lost my voice this week, it's kind of failing on us a little bit. When you fund the trust, then you do an undivided 1/2 interest in each trust. So even though you have these two separate trusts, you can still own everything together. So don't get freaked out about like, why would I have my own trust? You know, not with my husband. I want to own everything together. You still can, but why do we have these two trusts, right? So in the state of Illinois, they give you a little extra tax. Right now, the federal government, they're going to charge you an inheritance tax if your estate is over like 11 or 12 million. So most of us are pretty safe from that. I know. I like to ask people this, right? And keep a straight face and say, are you going to be worth over $10 million when you die? And then they laugh and smile and they all have a good chuckle. But the state of Illinois does a special. There's only 7 states out of all of our great 50 states that do this. They have a lower threshold, and they'll actually charge you a state, like in Illinois, not a state, but a state tax. It's 16%. If your estate is over $4 million. Now you're like, okay, right, you're still laughing, right? So, but life insurance counts. Like I've got $1 million of life insurance on me. My husband has on him, so now we're at 2. And then whatever, you know, our investments add up to, hopefully not this year maybe, but add up to someday. Or if we inherit any money from our parents, it's the value of your home. So it's all of your stuff in one pot minus any of your debt. You only get up to that 4 million and then you're taxed. So if you're at 4.1 million, they tax you 16% on the whole thing, not just the part that you're over. But so I bring us back to these 2 trusts, right? So why did I talk about that? And what does that have to do with taxes? So there's, it's called a Q-tip trust, and it's qualified terminable interest property. Magic language, right? Bunch of legalese. Where basically by having these his and hers trusts, the husband and wife, because you get this $4 million, you get it per person, all right? But you're allowed to share it if you're a married couple, and so you can combine through these 2 trusts in the magic legal language 4 million and 4 million combined, so you can shield up to 8 million. Okay, and it allows you to pass up to $8 million of wealth without paying that inheritance tax. So that's why you do it. You're basically doubling your, it's called an exemption amount. You're doubling it. It's a special kind of trust. And you do 2 of them. So then I make twice the money. Trusts are, they're expensive, but probate is more expensive, you know. All right, so we talked about my kids and how not only would I have a trust to avoid probate for myself, inside of that trust, I'm gonna have children's trusts, right? Because if I drop dead today, and my husband did too, and it was time for all the Barber kids to split everything equally, right, 3 ways, we would not want them, especially that life insurance money, we would not want them to just have that dumped in their lap, right? They wouldn't know what to do with it, they're too young, even if they were, let's say, 16, 15, and 14, right? I mean, they're just gonna blow through it. They're not responsible enough to manage that type of money. So we're gonna have these children's trusts. And remember, those are called testamentary ones, the little tiny ones that spring up inside of your main trust. All right, so we wanna keep assets in the family, and we wanna keep it controlled. We want it to be like mom and dad are still alive. All right, so trust, you can be super creative. I drafted some pretty interesting provisions, you know. If this, then you can have the money, but only if this. And you can take up to 1/3 of the principal of it out at age, 22, but then the rest of it has to stay in trust and you can't cash it out until age 30. Or, I mean, gosh, you can be creative. So you can do as much or as little as you want with a trust. And we talked about, so this is, yes.
Back to what you just said.
Yeah.
So when you created all that stuff, you were the trustee. Then
Right.
you're gone. You are no longer the trustee. Somebody else is.
Correct.
Why can't that other trustee change everything that you just said?
Okay, so we asked about changing the trust document by changes by your successor trustee. So it depends. It's however you write the trust, right? So it's called a power of appointment. And so, for example, in a joint trust for husband and wife, you have to decide what that power of appointment is going to be, right? So let's say I'm the first one to go, and now my husband is just, rather than being a co-trustee with me because I'm dead, now he's the sole trustee. Am I gonna have the attorney write that trust so that he has the power to change it? Because what if he marries some sweet young honey, right? And then he does everything to the surviving spouse, and then, what do you think she's gonna do with her estate plan? Like, these are not her kids, right? So you can do a full, like, there is no power of appointment and it's set in stone, and after this first spouse is gone, you can't change it at all. I like to do what's called a limited power of appointment, because we can't tell the future, right? We don't necessarily want to put it in stone. And so the limited power of appointment says you have the power to change this trust, but it can't be anything construed against the current beneficiaries. So in other words, let's say our original trust said to, everything to surviving spouse, and then last spouse to die to the 3 kids equally, right? We'll use the Barber kids again as an example. But then let's say my son Conrad, my oldest one, something happens and he ends up, and he's a special needs individual. The surviving spouse has that, let's say, that limited power of appointment where they can change the trust, and maybe Conrad's third is going to go to him in a special needs trust, but they can't change it to say everything to my new, husband or wife.
Well, in that case.
So they can change it in the interest of the current beneficiaries.
So in that case, you 2 are gone and your kids are minors still. Who is the trustee? Who's making the decision?
Whoever you pick. So he asked about, well, who is going to be the trustee, right? I keep talking about this trust will take care of these kids, or these children's trusts that are inside the big trust, taking care of these kids, and it's like mom and dad are still alive, right? Because it's got these rules. Well, he's asking, well, who's the right person for the job? So that's up to you when you initially do your estate plan. Some people, like, they'll name, so like I've got 2 sisters. One is two years younger than me, and she's a doctor and very responsible. She would probably be, my next in line successor trustee. Or maybe we have a trusted, like an uncle, or maybe like a best friend. The other option, you don't have to do an individual, And usually I say do a couple, right? Because people might pass away before you or just not be up for the job. Because it can be a little bit of a thankless job. But the other option besides the individual is you can have a corporate trustee. So there are like a bank with a trust department, for example, or like Edward Jones or Savant or any of these investment financial advisor sort of institutions, they'll have trust departments as well. Now they're professional trustees, so they're probably not going to need the help of an attorney to administrate the trust. So you sort of save on attorney's fees by using these professionals. Well, they're not going to do it for free, right? They're in the business of being a trustee. They typically tend to charge somewhere around like 1% of the value of the estate that they'll take for their fee. But then you don't have what I call the Thanksgiving table problem, where, you know, Uncle Charlie's in charge of my trust and I'm 20 and I'm eyeing him, and I'm like, can you give me that distribution? I submitted it in writing like the trust that I had to, and it was for tuition. I mean, I didn't show him the tuition invoice, and he probably thought I was going to use it to buy like a Ferrari or something, but he didn't give it to me. I'm so mad at him. Right? So you got like the sort of the family infighting, or, you know, I'm, you know, sweet Natalie batting my eyes, and Uncle Charlie, you know, I'm his favorite niece, and I'm like, oh yeah, I need the money for this Ferrari. It's the right kind of car for me. It's just responsible. I'm going to be a race car driver, so it's great. I need to practice. And I pull his heartstrings, and he's, you know, I'm his favorite niece, Natalie. So he gives me that distribution. Where a corporate trustee would be like, you know, they're going to be objective, they're going to be neutral, they're going to be, so you get to pick. You decide who your lineup is. It's like baseball, you kind of decide who's on deck and who's next. And and again, whether you own $1 or you are a millionaire, a trust is probably going to be right for you. You don't need a trust to avoid probate if you don't own your own home, because your assets will probably, we could do something called a small state affidavit and avoid probate. But remember, trusts really take care of you as you age because they've got that incapacity provision where it's just seamless, and your successor trustee can just step in and start doing the things. It's like power of attorney for property and healthcare kind of 2.0. Because remember, the power of attorney is not like a guardianship, right? The trust has that guardianship or that incapacity provision where you are declared incompetent through a doctor's note and an agreement of a family member in writing. And then that successor trustee starts doing the things, and you can no longer do the things, which can be a good thing, right? If somebody has Alzheimer's or dementia, we don't want them like accidentally selling the family farm or getting swindled, right? So that's very different than a power of attorney. Power of attorney is a convenience document where somebody can step into your shoes, but you can still do things. So different sort of legal tools for different situations, all right? So even if you, let's say you don't own your own home, you rent, or you've got a manufactured home, and you've got, you know, maybe $10,000 to your name, right? So well under that $100,000 limit where we can use a small estate affidavit and avoid probate. So it's like, oh, I don't need a trust because nothing's ever going to go to probate for me anyway. The trust has that incapacity provision in it. So a will simply can't do that. It's not designed to do that. So it's kind of like buying extra insurance, if you will. I was doing a seminar and I used this slide, this picture so many times. And a gentleman raised his hand and he said, you know, my parents had wills and my great aunt, she had a trust. And I was executor for my parents' wills, and I was the successor trustee for my great aunt's trust. So I went through both processes. And oh my goodness, you are so right on with the trust. It was like smooth sailing. I mean, it was just easy. It was like, you know, show that death certificate and the doors just opened. I could just do all the things. And with the will, we got it done. You know, we still got from point A to point B, but it sure was, you know, choppy waters and not smooth sailing like that. And I didn't even plant him. He just like raised his hand like right on cue. I was like, thank you, kind sir. So with trust, we can do really cool things for ministry, and we can have tax savings at the same time. So remember when I talked about the his and hers trust, right? And sharing your exemption amount so you can shield and you don't pay inheritance tax? Another way to avoid that inheritance tax is any amount that you give to a charity or to your church or any type of not-for-profit, that part doesn't count. as part of your estate, right? So let's say I'm at, 4.2 million, and I didn't do the his and hers trust because I didn't want to pay Natalie a couple $1,000s to get that done, which is fine. So instead, I'm going to give 200,000 to the church. I'm going to name them as beneficiary. Or let's say I'm like, well, gosh, I think my kids need to inherit all that money. I'm just not comfortable just giving away a couple $100,000 just so I can, save it and not give it to the government. I don't like feeling like I have to give it to someone. I want to give it to who I want to give it to, right? I already paid taxes on that money when I earned it through income tax. Doesn't seem fair, this double tax. So another cool thing you can do, there are different types of trusts. So if you look at, we talked about the living trust, the joint trust with the Q-tip, and there are these other ones, the CRT, the CLT, the CRAT, and the CRUT. So those are charitable remainder trusts, all right? And it's this cool balance where, and the CRAT and the CRUT are kind of like two different types. So it's got to be for 20 years, but you can either say, hey, this nest egg, this $200,000, right? That's going to be the principal that's going to be invested, just like you would invest your own money. And for 20 years, my kids get the income off of that nest egg, all right? And then at the end of the 20 years, that nest egg goes to charity. So that still counts as a charitable gift, and I get my little tax savings, and it's kind of a balance where my kids get to benefit off of it, but then I'm truly giving it to charity or ministry at the end. And then you've got it on the flip end, you can do where the church or the charity gets the income for 20 years, and then the kids get the nest egg at the end. So those are options as well, and those are different types of trusts. Yeah, you already did that when I had all those acronyms up there. So quick review. When someone says living trust or grantor trust or revocable or revocable, some fancy, like economics or economics, those can be changed during your life. They're not, sealed up. They're not set in stone the minute the ink is dry. Remember my lady with her 12 restatements? Okay, so that's a living trust. That's just the boring Google definition. Just remember the lady with the 12 restatements and you'll be fine. Like the 12 days of Christmas. People ask me, oh, I want to protect my house from the nursing home, so shouldn't I get an irrevocable trust and tie up all my assets so the nursing home can't take it someday? Well, first of all, the law actually gives you very generous protection where, because the problem with doing the irrevocable trust is, what would my 12 restatement spinster school teacher lady have done? Oh my gosh, she never would have been able to change it those 12 times, right? And our first idea is not always our best idea. So once it's irrevocable, right, the reason that nobody can get at it, and like people are always really worried about the nursing home situation, which I'll talk about in a second, the idea is if the government can't get at it, like you can't get at it either. And that's why it's shielded, but you just shielded it from yourself. And what if it wasn't perfect? And we can't tell the future. What if all of a sudden my Conrad, my son, like my example, he developed special needs, and now I can't change it that he's going to get his 1/3 share in that special needs trust. I just life happens and you need changes, and so I really highly recommend against the irrevocable trust for your main estate planning document. The little testamentary trust, remember that's the one that's kind of sitting on the side of the road. It's tucked inside of your trust, or it actually can be tucked inside of your will as well, like these children's trusts. And then they wake up, and then my successor trustee goes and gets that EIN number and shows the death certificate, goes to irs.gov and gets the taxpayer ID. That's a testamentary trust. All right, so we talked about the charitable remainder trust, charitable lead trust, the joint trust, and the Q-tip. And your lawyer will guide you through all of these. And you can be cool because now you've got the vocab, so you can say, oh, what do you think about this kind? And you can impress your lawyer. All right, so remember the 20 years, right? So with the CRT, it's what we call that split interest, right? Like I described. So you can name yourself or someone else to receive that income stream, right? So the Barber kids could get the income off that $200,000 for a term of years. It can't be any longer than 20 years. And then at the end, whatever's sitting there for the principal, we could give that to the church, for example.
But that can be shorter than 1, right?
Correct. Yeah, it could be 1 year, it could be 1 day. They might audit you if it's 1 day, so not 1 day. So again, so we got the CRAT and the FRED. All right, so the charitable lead trust, now this isn't the irrevocable trust, but it's designed to provide financial support to one or more charities for a period of time, with the remaining assets eventually going to the family members, right? So with this, the church or the charity is going to get the income stream, and then the kids are going to get the nest egg, in that example. A joint trust, if you're like under that 4 million, and even with your life insurance in your house, and we add up everything, and you're still giggling, right? If you're under that 4 million, a joint trust will do you just fine, right? You don't need the his and hers trust with all that tax planning, and all the exemption amount stuff I was talking about. You just need a joint trust. You name everything in this joint trust, right? So you still own everything together. It's just the two of you spouses as trustees of your own trust, and you avoid probate. And that would be your reason to get a joint trust. And that, I would say, out of my clients, probably 90% of people do that. All right, the Q-tip, that is the fancy, so these his and hers trusts, inside of them, they have these little, it's like an A bucket and a B bucket, right? They have a little A trust and a B trust. And it's just like, imagine, remember that pour over will example where I had the water pouring? Just imagine your assets kind of going through these little hoops, so to speak, on the estate tax return. When you pass and we're reporting to the government what you owe so they can grab their 16%. If you pass it through these hoops and you've got the his and hers trusts, and then you've got the Q-tip provision in there, that's the magic language that allows you to, it's called spousal portability, and you get to share your 4 millions up to the 8 million. So that's what that Q-tip stuff is. You can ask your lawyer about that too. It's not fancy. All right, I'll hand it back over to Dionne.
It's hard for me to give a control result. Ask my husband. Okay, one more question.
Well,
Okay.
since both of you are going to touch on, that use of the irrevocable or.
Oh, the nursing home situation. Sorry. Oh my gosh. So there's a myth that like we have to use these irrevocable trusts, and we've got to hide our assets from the nursing home, and they're going to get the house, and they're going to, bleed us dry. The law is actually already very generous. So if you've got a married couple, one spouse goes to the nursing home, right, and the other spouse is still residing in the house, that asset is shielded. Like you might as well have put it in the irrevocable trust. They can't touch it, they can't count it. And then on top of the house being shielded, it's like it changes every year, but it's about a couple $1,000s a month is also shielded. So no one's gonna like take you out of house and home and put you in the poorhouse just because you got someone in the nursing home, all right? And they never even start to look at your assets until you run out of money. And if you kind of tried to do good financial planning and maybe you got long-term care insurance or, right, you probably won't even be in that situation where they're ever looking at your stuff. Also, if you're gonna hurry up and maybe you're like, well, Natalie, I'll just have the revocable trust, right, the changeable one for my whole life, and then right before I'm gonna go in the nursing home, I'll just do an irrevocable one and we'll be all good to go, right? No, they have a 5-year look back. So anything, you have to know 5 years in advance. So there's not really room for that trickery either. Also, if you are a single person and you're like, well, I don't want them to sell my house and use it to, pay my bill. I want my kids to be able to inherit something that's, my biggest and best asset that I own. If you're someone that's going into the nursing home and there's any possibility that you could be returning to the home, it also is shielded and they can't look at it. So that was yes.
So just clarify something for me. So if you have your house in the trust and you decide to sell it,
Yes.
do you sell it or does the trust sell it?
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so you said if you have your house in a trust and then you try to sell your house, like, do you sell it or does the trust sell it or how does that work? So you are the trustee, or you and your spouse presumably, are trustees of your trust. So you're still selling it, but the deed, instead of saying from, John Smith to Jane Doe, right, whoever your buyer is, it says John Smith as sole trustee of the John Smith Trust selling to Jane Doe. So it's easy. It's not like because you put all your stuff in trust, now life is like a pain in the butt to do anything with your stuff. It's just an extra little label. It's just like putting a baseball hat on, it's just a different hat.
So when the trust was created, the house became no longer my house, but, the house was in the trust with me as trustee.
Right, so instead of you owning it as an individual, you own it as trustee of your trust. So your stuff is still for you, by you. Yes.
You just give a little quick definition of what it means to fund trust.
Oh, okay, so funding the trust is very important, right? That's step 2. Sometimes you need a separate meeting for it. If you can ever get Natalie to stop rescheduling the meeting, she'll do the meeting with you. So the trust is not worth the paper it's printed on until there's stuff in it. And so what you're gonna do, hopefully with your attorney, or Dionne said she does this with people too, which is amazing, because I can't tell you how many trusts I've administrated where,
Not great.
she's great, that's right, the meter's not running with her. And we do our estate plans for flat fees, right, so that the meter's not running, so you can have as many meetings as you need to get this funded. So with the trust, you have to either name your assets in trust, right? So you could do like a deed, you could quit claim it from yourself to yourself as trustee of your trust. Or if I've got a portfolio with Edward-Jones, I would give a copy of my trust to my financial advisor and say, instead of these being like the Natalie Barber accounts, now they're Natalie Barber is trustee of the Natalie Barber trust account, right? So you do that for just about everything, but like IRAs, for example. Unless you've got a really unique situation, like let's say that special needs trust, right, for my son inside of the trust, where that's the priority, I want to make sure that he is not a named beneficiary, because I don't want the government to count that as income for him. I might name a trust as a beneficiary in an IRA. But typically, you want your trust as like a backup, and you want a person, because in that case, you're kind of doing the follow the money, right? That's your priority. With an IRA, for example, you've got that tax consequence situation, right? So you might name the individual because they can do the rollover thing. For the trust, you have to liquidate. So you lose kind of what an IRA does for you. But Dionne was talking about like finding the best asset and the best method, the best thing for doing a gift. You get the tax savings. You get the tax savings like with an IRA. It's really awesome to name like a church or a charity as a beneficiary, right? Because you got the tax savings. Which Dionne can talk more about that. It's more of like a numbers question. Okay, we gotta wrap up.
She's good at Q&A because she does have a lot of A. And that's just kind of where we hand off for me, and what does that look like for a Christian estate plan. So one thing, some of the things that I will help you check the boxes on, even though I can't do the will and the pour-over will and help you with the durable powers of attorney, I can make sure we're checking those boxes, right? So I can be your, like I said, your firelighter, your encourager. I can start the fire if you need me to do that. But the things that we can do at the foundation are all of these things. So when it's time to look through your requests, I can help you check those boxes and stay in the attorney's conference room afterwards so that we're getting all of those things marked off. But we can also help you with writing your charitable trust, your donor advised funds, a family endowment, or even gift annuities. So those are things that we can do for you at the foundation. Your team is everyone. We talked about that a little bit last week. Just as a reminder, we need all of these people. And that the last bullet to me is such an important bullet. I'm going to say it again. Make sure your family is part of this. Until you share your stewardship intentions with your family, that's part of our stewardship, right? Having those conversations, having pleasant conversations over Thanksgiving dinner about who you love, what you love doing, what you want to see out of your assets when you go to heaven. Those can be really cool and powerful and memorable conversations. We can encourage you to write a statement of faith. We can help you create a gift plan for your family and a gift plan for your favorite ministries. And then the outcome is all of those kinds of things. And ultimately, we get to share Jesus. And that to me is we get to also help check that box. We're part of that great commission of sharing Jesus. And that's where I say thanks. And look at that, right on time,
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Jen, for your work here. If you do, are you guys going to be around for just a minute now?
I did bring some packet information. If anybody wants to see kind of just even the process that we take people through, there's some illustrations in there.
please feel free. And, not pushing, but they're there for you if you want to.
Free resources.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you for for last week and for this week for all that information. And if you do have more information too, or any questions, feel free to send it their way. But just as looking ahead, next weekend, which is going to be the first Sunday of Advent, it's also the Sunday right after Thanksgiving. We'll have a Ask the Pastor Q&A in here next weekend, and then the following week, so in 2 weeks, we'll start our next Bible study. So we'll start that Bible study in 2 weeks' time. TBD. So we have some options, but we've had a few other things going on that have diverted my attention. So, yeah, so in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have that Bible study starting. Next week will be the Ask the Pastors Q&A. So thank you all very much. Look forward to seeing you around. And congregational meeting will be in the sanctuary at 1 p.m. this afternoon.